Paul, just start with you. I want to talk about the topic of neutral venues, because we know you've spoken to the club, spoken out about it already. And I suppose the disadvantage that Brighton would be at. Can you just clarify your position? And I suppose, how can there be a resolution, and a safe resolution, for the league to actually get started again?
Well, our position's been very clear all the way through, Emma. I mean, we first of all, we want to finish this season. We want to play out our games. We want to make sure that it's safe for our players and our staff for us to play out our games. But we also want the competition to remain as fair as possible. And, we entered the competition on the basis of 38 games, 19 home, 19 away. And, the compromise that we've all had to accept, quite rightly, is that there won't be fans, almost certainly won't be fans in the stadium for the remainder of this season. That's a big compromise when the balance of your remaining fixtures are at home. We've got 5 at home, 4 away. That for us is a very, very significant factor in our season. It's over 25% of our home games are still yet to come. And obviously our ideal position is to be able to play those games in our own stadium, even if it's without fans. And so our position at the weekend, and it's been the same ever since, is that we don't want to see a change to the competition. We can't be in favour of something that potentially disadvantages our club. We've worked incredibly hard to reach the Premier League. We've invested a huge amount of money. Our owners invested a huge amount of money in reaching the Premier League. And we simply want to be able to see the league out on a fair basis. And if we end up relegated from a sporting point of view after that fair basis has been concluded, then that's one of the consequences of entering a competition this tough. We understand and respect that. But we would be very disappointed if we were in a position where we were relegated after a situation where the competition changed after 75% of the games had been played.
And Paul, just second question to you. Obviously, we know we've got the league is targeting a return to training in small groups from May the 18th. With that date in mind, what are the plans for overseas players, the likes of Matt Ryan, who's in Australia at the moment? Is there a timeline in place at the moment?
Yeah, there's a plan in place. I mean, Dan can talk to that plan, but we're very comfortable that our players will be back in time within the schedules that we've specified for them. And, providing the government and the Premier League give us the go-ahead to train in small groups, then we'll be ready to do that.
Great, thanks so much, Paul. And Dan, just more on that. I know we've had players come out and talk this week, the likes of Sergio Aguero, talking about the risk, and players are fearful of going back to training, especially those with young families as well. Dean Smith was talking on Sky Sports News, saying that, for example, he's got a player who's got asthma, he's got a player who lives with a vulnerable mother-in-law as well. Have your players raised any concerns? And I suppose, regardless of the recommendations, what specific protocols will you be putting in place?
Yeah, I'll reiterate what Paul said there. I mean, fundamentally, we support coming back and finishing the season, providing it's safe for players and staff. That's number one for us, as it is for all of the clubs, I know. Regarding the players themselves, they're all in different situations. I saw Dean's comments. We've got one of our players has got, one of his family members has got quite a serious medical condition. So they're all in slightly different situations. The players have got to be happy and comfortable to come back, and that's one of the things that we'll be talking to them even more so once we get a definitive return to train, return to play, and the protocols that have been put in place. But we're in regular contact with our players all the way through, and some of them are slightly more concerned than others.
And Dan, just lastly from me to you. We know there are doctors who have expressed concerns about the Project Restart proposal. What have your club doctors said? Yeah,
I mean, there's a Premier League doctors group. We're on that. There's regular correspondence with the other doctors from the Premier League and with the Premier League. They share views. They share confidential views. They share views that are obviously shared a little bit more publicly. But they're all of a similar vein, I believe, that, again, I go back to the most important thing in all of this is to protect the safety of the players and the staff.
Paul, can I just ask you about the concept of neutral stadiums? Is that something which is seen as a deal breaker, or the only way in which this Premier League can continue if clubs do agree to play in neutral stadiums?
Yet seen the complete plan, and in fairness to the Premier League, they're trying to put in place lots of pieces of a a very big jigsaw in order to give us a complete picture. And at the moment, we've got certain pieces, but not all of the pieces. And I think it's important over the next few days that we, and certainly at Monday's meeting, that we start to see a more complete picture of everything that we're being asked to agree to. Because obviously at this stage of the season, we are 75% of the way through it. Any changes are fundamental. And, we totally understand in these conditions and in this environment that there's going to have to be some compromises. But as I said to Emma just now, what we can't do is support something that is going to potentially jeopardise our position in the Premier League, and therefore make it even harder for us to stay in what is already a very tough competition. So we'll see what Monday brings. And we will continue to be cooperative and collaborative. We want to finish the season. We'll do everything we possibly can to support that. We're not in favour of neutral venues.
Christian Perslow told us yesterday on TalkSport that the key issue that hasn't been resolved yet is what happens if a player tests positive for COVID-19 or shows symptoms. Is that the case for you as well? And what do you think would be the ideal scenario if that did happen?
Well, I think it comes back to, again, what I was saying just now about getting the complete picture. There are so many pieces to this giant jigsaw that we're all trying to assemble. And until all the pieces are in place, you can't actually see that whole picture. And obviously the return to play protocol is another part of that jigsaw, another piece in it, which is very, very important. I mean, Dan will probably talk a little bit more about that as well. But clearly, in order for the competition to finish fairly, we want it to be as close to the original basis of the competition that we started. And there are going to be almost inevitably situations over the weeks that follow, assuming that we can start safely, where teams are going to suffer situations where players get ill. And we need to understand, what the Premier League's plan is for what happens in that eventuality. Because at the end of the day, we've said it 1,000 times in the last 8 weeks, player and staff safety must be an absolute priority.
Dan, can I ask you about Rick Parry's comments the other day about parachute payments, something that you'd know about from your time at West Brom? What are your thoughts on what he said, which is basically that it's an evil that needs to be eradicated from the game?
Yeah, I can see both sides to the argument. I'm not quite sure Rick was that strong in his views, but look, I understand the reasons for parachute payments, because obviously clubs go into medium to long-term contracts with their players, and if you suffer relegation, you need the parachute. You need a way of being able to protect the club on relegation when your income is cut drastically, and the parachute payments just help soften that blow and allow you to either keep those players and push back for promotion, which is obviously one of the things that you could argue is a competitive disadvantage within the league. But it also protects the clubs from, extreme financial hardship. It was put in place a number of years ago, obviously through the Premier League, and has been an area of debate year on year, really. I can see the pros and cons. Obviously, I've benefited from it at the times at West Brom, where we've had parachute payments, but also seen the other side of it from other clubs I've worked at as well.
Is it something that would be absolutely essential for Brighton to have if the worst situation happened and the club were relegated?
Yeah, it would. I mean, look, I know our contracts. I've done or sort of been privy to most of the contracts that we've got here, and in today's day and age, in order to protect your compensation rights, now that there's the Bosman's in place of players aged 24 and above, you want to make sure that you've got decent length contracts to protect your assets. Therefore, with a club like Brighton and West Brom, where I worked before, when invariably each season you want to try and stay or get into the Premier League, there's going to be seasons where that doesn't quite work out for you. So, you've got to try and protect your assets and go into longer term contracts. Within that, of course, you put relegation clauses in there to help that protection, but you can never do that with the number of staff and protecting your players, as the way I've just talked about it, without some sort of safety net. And that's what the parachute payment is there for.
Just finally from me, can I just get your thoughts on games being played in neutral stadiums behind closed doors? Is it something that you can see happening? Is it something that you'd be happy to happen, considering at the moment relegation is still a possibility?
Yeah, the club stance is clear, and we're united on that. We don't agree with neutral venues for various different reasons. As Paul's already said, the competitive advantage of playing at home is proven. The facts, the stats are out there. It's almost half a point per game, and he looked at the last 6 years of the Premier League. There's a half a point per game advantage of playing at home in the Premier League. And that's magnified more for us. Ours is a greater sway. So, back to the conversation we've just had about the importance of staying in the league. We feel that it should be, we should finish the season as it started, albeit there are some different circumstances, and play our home games in our home ground, because that's the competitive advantage for us for home games. That's fair and set, and that's what we set out to do. Now, with the current situation, I think everybody accepts that has to be behind closed doors, of course, but we don't agree with the policy of going to neutral venues.
Yeah, great. Thanks, guys. Dan, just following on from what you were saying there to James, if I could just stay on the neutral venues thing, is this a dangerous precedent to be set in terms of if it were to happen? Are there major concerns in terms of the sport going forward? People are touted with games being played abroad, for instance.
Yeah, I think again, back to the integrity of the competition, that, you get same amount of home and away games throughout the season. You get to play in the comforts of your home ground. And it's not just the crowd. Of course, everybody's stadium and crowd are important, but it's the playing surface. It's the size of the playing surface. It's the change rooms. You don't have to travel for your home games, whereas you do have to endure overnight stays. The players can sleep in their own beds the night before the home games. There's all those other factors that are outside, not just the crowd. Clubs have invested a lot of money into their stadium, making sure they're up to the specs that they require, that gets the best out of them and their players, and the need for the Premier League. And that's what we all bought into, and that's something that we're really keen to make sure, as much as we can, that we push for the remaining part of this season. I think if you start the season afresh and it's different, I suppose, yes, that is different, but certainly neutral venues wouldn't be anything I would be in favour of at any stage. And we look across the sea and you see Germany going back to, hope and resuming, and it seems like they will be playing in their home stadia in the Bundesliga.
You mentioned Germany, they've managed it. Do you have any medical concerns over the consequences of the protocols? I mean, there have been some reports that doctors have written to the Premier League about their concerns. What medical concerns do you have?
Yeah, look, we have all got concerns, Johnny. Of course we have. We're in unprecedented times, and it's something that the whole world is having to come to terms with, the horrendous effects of this virus. Paul said it, I've said it numerous times, not least on today's media conference, but it's of paramount importance, and the number one for us is, and all clubs, is the safety of our players and staff. So anything that we can do to make sure that we're covered as much as possible and prevent any further spread of the virus, we would have to do. And it's so complicated. There's so many different factors that, of course, every single medical department has probably got the odd question or two. Again, as I've already stated, there's a Premier League doctors group which meet regularly, in regular contact with the Premier League, which is, of course, in regular contact with the owners and the CEOs to hopefully come to the right decision, the right conclusion, that we can resume the season with the safety of the players and the staff.
Lovely, thanks, Dan. Paul, if I could just start with you. Sorry to labour the point about neutral venues, but to your understanding, is it just, I mean, there's some reports suggesting it is just the bottom six that object to neutral venues. Is that your understanding from the discussions you've had with your colleagues at other clubs?
No, I think there are clubs at different levels of the league that have an issue with neutral venues, and I think there's concern about the fairness element. I think if we were in a situation where all games are equal and everybody had to play the same number of games at home as they had away at this stage of the season, that might be one thing. If we were playing the same teams in the same order at this stage of the season, of course, that's never going to happen. That would be another thing. But the reality is, we are 3/4 of the way through the season. Teams have got a large number of home games left or a smaller number of home games left. They have got big teams to play and smaller teams to play. In our case, we've got 4 of the 6 biggest clubs, not just in the league, but in Europe. And, at our ground, traditionally we've done okay against those teams, largely. And from that point of view, it's not just about the crowd, as Dan says. The statistics are very clear. There is a clear advantage from being on your home venue, and that's with and without a crowd. So from that point of view, a lot of it comes into the money we've invested in our training ground. We've built our training ground over the last 4 or 5 years, spending tens of millions of pounds to replicate the conditions as best we can at our training ground to switch to the stadium. The pitches are the same, the cut the same size, same grass, dressing room looks and feels the same, the environment is similar. And all of that is designed to maximize whatever home advantage you can gain. Just to simply strip that away 3/4 of the way through the season, to us seems unfair. And, we're a reasonable club. We've been open and transparent all the way through in our communications. And we're the same on this issue. We don't think it's right. We don't think it's fair. And whilst we respect that we're in a very difficult situation and we want to try and be as collegiate and as supportive as possible, we can't support something that is going to put our club at disadvantage. My job, primarily, first objective is to represent Brighton. The second part of my job is to make sure I do what I can to support the league. And the third part of my job is to do what I can to support the wider football industry. But I have to do it in that order. And to support something that puts my football club at a distinct disadvantage and increases the jeopardy that we face in any given season doesn't make any sense. And I don't think any chief executive in any football club would do something that jeopardised their own club's prospects in any given season. And I wouldn't expect them to. And I read reports of, self-interest and all of this sort of stuff. Of course there's self-interest. Every single club in the Premier League has got a degree and a level of self-interest at this stage of the season. It would be a very bizarre competition if they didn't have. And that's fine. And that's totally understandable. Every level of the league, it's totally understandable for any club to have a degree of self-interest. My self-interest is trying to do the best for Brighton and trying to help shape the right decisions for Brighton. And after that, for the league, and after that, for the wider football industry. And we totally accept our responsibility for the second and third objectives as well. But we have to look at our own club first.
Just very quickly, have you been approached about being a neutral venue? I know you said a couple of weeks ago you had not had any contact. Has that changed?
No, not at all.
Okay. No. Just in terms of the next step, what is your expectation of the next move from the Premier League? I know it's difficult to sort of best guess, but in terms of the timeline, what are you expecting the next step to be in terms of resolution come Monday?
Well, as I said before, first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge they've got a really difficult job here. This isn't for me, I don't think it's a big six clubs versus a bottom six clubs issue. I think the clubs at every level of the league have concerns about neutral venues. I think the Premier League are trying very hard to put together a very complex jigsaw, and each piece of that jigsaw, when it's put in place, gives us a clearer picture of what we might be signing up for returning to play the rest of this season. But I think until we see the complete picture, it's very difficult to vote in any particular way, shape or form. We've been clear on neutral venues, but we don't yet know what the wider picture looks like. When we do, when we understand the health and safety protocols in full, not just return to training, but return to play, when we understand the operational considerations, venues, and how we're going to manage them, that's another big part of the jigsaw. And then, of course, finally, we also need to understand the commercial elements and, the broadcast elements and, the impacts on our own individual clubs and how the whole picture is going to emerge. And I think once we've got that, and as soon as we've got that, then it will be much easier to make some big decisions. But at the moment, we only have parts of that picture and therefore it's unclear.
Paul, first of all, coming to you, the majority of this press conference so far has been a lot about the sort of short-term, immediate issues that you as a club are facing and the whole league's facing, understandably. Can you give us an insight into how much this is affecting sort of the medium, long-term planning for the club next season and beyond? Can you even go into that at the moment because the immediate needs are so pressing?
Well, I think first of all, when you're in the midst of a crisis, you've got to focus on the crisis clearly. It's important to deal with the here and now, but it's also important to lift your head and to look at what you need to think about for certainly for the near term after that. And clearly the near term after that is going to be a transfer window, and therefore some kind of conclusion to this season in order to understand exactly what you're dealing with next season is important. And we've said right from the start, Ian, that finishing this season without it impacting on next is really important. What we really don't want is a situation where we have two significantly damaged seasons. And I don't think anyone in the game that I've spoken to wants that. Certainly not the broadcasters, certainly not the sponsors, certainly not the fans, and definitely not the clubs. So from that point of view, I think looking ahead, I'm trying my best at the moment to focus on the here and now so we can get through this situation intact. And then after that, what do we need to do to prepare to make the best of next season, whatever next season looks like? And we've said it a couple of times in this press conference already that we are in a very difficult period. We understand all of the challenges that every single person in the country is facing, every single industry, and we're trying to balance that with returning our industry to some degree of normality, i.e., getting back to play when it's safe, if it's fair. And to give the country a little bit of hope. And I do believe that if we can get back to playing, it could help lift the spirits of the country. It could help, give people something to look forward to each weekend during what will still be some very difficult weeks and possibly months ahead. So, of course, we're united behind that idea. But for the sake of our own business, drawing it right the way back to basics, it's got to be safe. It's got to be really safe for the players and staff. And it's got to be on the same fair basis that we started the season.
Thank you. A similar point to you, Dan, as well, really, in terms of the squad management, making decisions on players' futures, all that sort of thing. Is that just on hold for the moment, or can you still work on that during this period? Yeah,
it's never on hold, Ian. I think we would normally run with two scenarios. So we'd run if we're still in the Premier League. We run if we were in the Championship. So normally at this stage of the season we would know. I think, a couple of games remaining. So normally we would have a pretty good idea. We would know. So the third scenario that we run with now is obviously is the uncertainty of the season resuming or not. So, if it does resume, what are the financial implications? And then we've got Premier League or Championship next year. If it doesn't resume, what are the financial implications? Again, Premier League, Championship next year. So, we've got an extra scenario, if you like, to plan for. We've got a recruitment department, an academy department that's, currently making decisions should any of those scenarios happen, as well as with our existing players. We've been given a little bit of flexibility or proposed a bit of flexibility on sort of deadlines for extending contracts and things, which is great, well received. But, our job is to make sure we are looking to the medium to long term. There's just an extra scenario thrown in here now that we didn't know about 7 or 8 weeks ago.
As you would normally have at this point then, or is it totally different?
Sorry, Ian, I missed the first part of your question.
So I was saying, are you having as many conversations with players, agents, other clubs at this point that you'd normally be having, or is it totally different?
No, I suppose that part is different. I mean, look, the transfer window isn't open, so, there's no business you can do. And now we don't know when that transfer window is going to be. So even though internally there's plenty of conversations going on about, player X or player Y, retain that one, look to get that one, it's a bit more uncertain. So I would say the volume of conversations with agents and clubs would have decreased, simply because everybody is so uncertain what's going to happen over the coming months.